In this episode, we move into a topic that quietly shapes almost every secure environment, even when users barely notice it while they log in and get on with their day. Identity and access management, IAM, is the part of security that decides who someone is, what they are allowed to do, and how that access is controlled over time as roles, devices, and business needs change. For brand new learners, this matters because many breaches do not begin with some dramatic technical exploit against a hardened server. They begin with a weak identity process, excess permissions, reused credentials, or an access decision that was far too trusting for the situation. When you understand IAM models, you begin to see that security is not only about blocking attackers from the outside. It is also about managing trust carefully on the inside so that employees, vendors, applications, and administrators only receive the level of access they truly need, and so that misuse becomes easier to detect before it grows into a larger problem. At the most basic level, identity is the answer to the question of who or what is requesting access. That who may be a human user, a server, a service account, a cloud workload, a mobile device, or even an application talking to another application. Access is the answer to a different question, which is what that identity is allowed to reach, use, change, or control once it has been recognized. Management is the ongoing process of creating identities, assigning permissions, reviewing those permissions, adjusting them when circumstances change, and removing them when they are no longer appropriate. The reason people use the word models is that organizations do not handle this trust in exactly the same way. They rely on different approaches for assigning rights, organizing users, evaluating requests, and balancing convenience with protection. A model gives structure to that process, so the organization is not making access decisions in a random or inconsistent way every time a person signs in, changes jobs, or tries to open a sensitive system. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A very helpful beginner distinction is the difference between authentication and authorization, because many people mix those ideas together at first. Authentication is the process of proving identity, which usually means answering the question of whether the person or system really is who it claims to be. Authorization happens after that, and it decides what the verified identity is allowed to do. You can think of it like entering a large office building. Showing a badge at the front door is one kind of authentication, but being allowed into the finance room, the server room, or the executive suite is a matter of authorization. The third piece that often receives less attention is accountability, which means the organization can connect actions back to an identity through logs, records, approvals, and review processes. A strong IAM approach brings all three together because a secure environment does not just want to let in the right people. It also wants to limit their access intelligently and preserve evidence of what happened when something unusual or harmful takes place. One of the most important ideas inside IAM is that access should follow business need rather than personal preference or historical habit. People often accumulate permissions over time because they changed roles, helped on a temporary project, or inherited access from a previous team, and no one ever cleaned it up. That creates a dangerous condition called privilege creep, where identities slowly gain more access than their current responsibilities justify. A good access model fights that tendency by tying permissions to defined responsibilities, sensitivity levels, and real operational need. This supports the principle of least privilege, which means giving an identity only the minimum access necessary to perform its legitimate tasks. Least privilege is not about making work harder for people. It is about reducing unnecessary exposure so that a mistake, a phishing attack, or a compromised account cannot automatically reach everything. For security analysts, this matters because excessive access makes abuse harder to spot. When too many people can do too many things, suspicious behavior blends in more easily with routine activity. One classic access model is discretionary access control, DAC, where the owner of a resource has significant control over who else can access it. In simple terms, the person who creates or owns a file, folder, or other object may decide which other users can read it, edit it, or share it. This model offers flexibility, and that flexibility can be useful in collaborative environments where people need to make quick decisions about sharing information. At the same time, DAC can become messy because access decisions may vary widely from one person to another, and users do not always make security choices with the same level of care or consistency. A document that should stay limited may be shared too broadly simply because someone wanted convenience. Another weakness is that the organization may lose centralized visibility over who truly has access across the environment. For a beginner, the main takeaway is that DAC offers freedom, but freedom and security often creates uneven control, which can lead to oversharing, confusion, and access that expands faster than anyone intended. Another important model is mandatory access control, MAC, which is more rigid and centralized. In this approach, access decisions are controlled by policy and classification rules rather than by the individual user who owns a resource. A system using MAC may assign labels such as levels of sensitivity to information and then compare those labels to the clearance level of the person requesting access. The user cannot simply decide to share a restricted file with someone else if policy says that person is not authorized for that sensitivity level. This model is often associated with environments where control must be strict and consistent because the consequences of inappropriate access are especially serious. For beginners, the easiest way to understand MAC is to think of it as policy first and personal choice second. That makes it less flexible than DAC, but also more predictable and easier to govern when data classification matters deeply. The trade-off is that strict control can slow down work if the environment is not designed carefully around real operational needs. A model you will hear about often in modern organizations is role-based access control, or BAC. Instead of assigning permissions one person at a time for every system and resource, our BAC groups permissions into roles that reflect business responsibilities. An employee in human resources may receive one role, a help desk analyst another, and a database administrator another, with each role carrying a specific set of approved permissions. This makes access easier to manage because the organization can align rights with job function rather than building entirely custom access profiles for every individual. When someone changes departments, access can be adjusted by changing the assigned role, instead of manually reviewing countless separate permissions. RBAC is popular because it supports consistency, scales well, and reduces administrative confusion. Still, it is not perfect. If roles are designed too broadly, users may still receive more access than they need. If roles are designed too narrowly, the model can become complicated and hard to maintain. The strength of our BAC depends heavily on how thoughtfully the organization defines those business roles in the first place. A more flexible model is attribute-based access control, ABAC, which makes decisions by evaluating multiple attributes rather than relying only on static roles. These attributes can relate to the user, the device, the requested resource, the time of day, the location, the sensitivity of the data, or other contextual factors. Instead of saying a person can access a system simply because they belong to one role, ABAC can ask whether the request makes sense under the current conditions. A user may be approved to access a certain application from a managed company laptop during business hours, but denied if trying the same request from an unknown device in an unusual location. This approach gives organizations a finer level of control and can support more adaptive decision-making. The main challenge is complexity. ABAC policies can become difficult to design, explain, and troubleshoot if too many conditions are piled together. Still, for analysts, it is important to understand that modern access decisions increasingly depend on context, not just identity alone, and ABAC is one of the clearest examples of that shift. Another way to think about IAM models is to compare centralized and decentralized management approaches. In a centralized approach, identities and access decisions are handled through a common directory or control structure, which helps the organization apply standards consistently and review access from one place. This often improves visibility, simplifies onboarding and offboarding, and makes auditing easier because there is a clearer source of truth. In a decentralized environment, different departments, business units, or systems may manage access in their own separate ways that can sometimes fit the realities of large or complex organizations, especially those formed through acquisitions or using many specialized platforms. However, decentralization often creates inconsistent policies, duplicate accounts, and blind spots where users keep access longer than they should. For beginners, centralized does not mean perfect and decentralized does not mean careless. But centralization usually supports stronger governance because fewer access decisions are hidden in isolated corners of the environment. Analysts benefit from that visibility because investigations move faster when identity data is organized rather than scattered. Modern IAM also depends heavily on strong authentication methods because the best access model in the world is weakened if attackers can easily pretend to be legitimate users. This is where single sign-on, SSO, and multi-factor authentication, MFA, often enter the picture. SSO allows users to authenticate once and then access multiple connected services without repeatedly signing in, which improves convenience and can reduce password fatigue. MFA strengthens the login process by requiring more than one kind of proof, such as something a user knows, something they have, or something they are. Many beginners assume convenience and security always oppose each other, but SSO and MFA show that thoughtful design can improve both when implemented well. SSO reduces the urge to reuse weak passwords across many services, while MFA adds friction specifically where it helps most, at the moment trust is being established. For defenders, strong authentication is essential because access control decisions are only meaningful if the identity at the center of those decisions is genuine. Privileged accounts deserve special attention because they can make major changes, access sensitive systems, and bypass controls that ordinary users cannot. These may include administrators, senior engineers, service accounts with elevated rights, and specialized accounts used to manage infrastructure or security tools. Because of their power, these identities are especially attractive to attackers, and misuse involving them can cause outsized damage very quickly. That is why organizations often use privileged access management, PAM, practices to place tighter control around such accounts, including stronger approval processes, better monitoring, temporary elevation, and more careful credential handling. A beginner should recognize that not all accounts are equally dangerous when compromised. A standard user account may expose email or files, but a privileged account may expose the whole environment. Good IAM models reflect that difference by separating everyday access from sensitive administrative power. Analysts also watch privileged activity closely because unusual behavior from these accounts, even if technically authorized, may indicate abuse, compromise, or a process that no longer matches sound security practice. Lifecycle management is another major part of IAM that people often underestimate when first learning security. Creating an account is only the beginning. Identities need to be reviewed, updated, suspended, and removed as employees are hired, promoted, transferred, placed on leave, or separated from the organization. Vendors come and go, projects begin and end, and temporary access granted during an emergency can quietly remain in place long after the emergency is over. Every one of those moments creates risk if access is not adjusted correctly. This is why onboarding, role changes, and offboarding are security events, not just administrative events. A strong model ensures access changes track real-world changes quickly enough that dormant or inappropriate permissions do not linger. Security analysts should care about this because many suspicious incidents involve accounts that were overlooked, shared, or never fully removed. When IAM lifecycle processes are weak, the environment fills with stale identities and excess permissions, and attackers love unused or forgotten pathways because they attract less attention than active, well-managed accounts. As organizations mature, they also try to move away from broad trust assumptions and toward more continuous evaluation of access requests. This is where ideas associated with zero trust become relevant, even for beginners. Zero trust does not mean trusting nothing in a literal sense. It means the organization does not automatically grant broad confidence just because a user is inside the network, on a familiar device, or connecting from a historically accepted location. Access should be verified and limited based on current evidence, business need, and context. That perspective fits naturally with stronger IAM models because identity becomes a dynamic decision point rather than a one-time gate at the start of the day. A user may authenticate successfully, but that alone should not guarantee unrestricted access to everything else. This matters in modern environments where remote work, cloud services, contractors, and mobile devices blur the old boundary between inside and outside. Analysts investigating suspicious access increasingly rely on this context because unusual requests may only make sense when compared to expected device, location, role, and behavior patterns. Common misconceptions can cause real trouble in this area, so it helps to challenge them directly. One misconception is that if a user has logged in successfully, their actions should be assumed normal until proven otherwise. In reality, stolen credentials are extremely common, and a valid login may still be part of malicious activity. Another misconception is that once access is granted, it should remain in place unless someone complains. That thinking leads directly to privilege creep and stale accounts. Some people also assume that identity security is only the responsibility of the help desk or system administrators, but analysts, managers, auditors, and business leaders all play a role because access decisions reflect business risk, not just technical preference. Finally, many beginners think strong IAM is mainly about passwords, when it is actually about the full trust relationship around identity, authentication, authorization, review, monitoring, and removal. Once you see IAM that way, it becomes clear why it appears everywhere in defensive security. It shapes what attackers can reach, how fast incidents spread, and how confidently the organization can explain who had access to what and when. What should stay with you after this discussion is that identity and access management models are really models of trust. They answer how an organization decides who belongs, how much access each identity receives, under what conditions that access should be allowed, and how the whole process is kept under control as people, systems, and business needs change. DAC, MAC, RBAC, and ABAC each represent different ways of making those decisions, and each brings strengths as well as trade-offs in flexibility, consistency, and complexity. Around those models, strong authentication, careful privilege management, lifecycle discipline, and context-aware decision-making all help turn access from a convenience habit into a security control. For someone studying CISA+, this is important because many alerts, investigations, and breaches make more sense once you recognize that identity is often the real battleground. When trust is managed deliberately, damage is limited and suspicious behavior becomes easier to spot. When trust is handed out loosely, even a normal login can become the first step in a very abnormal incident.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.